So fear is what kept that bag of gold buried in the ground. Of course it is, right? Alas, fear rears its ugly head yet again. This past fall, I did a whole sermon series on fear. And now we find ourselves back to fear again. Oh my goodness. Fear is what drove the third servant to simply tuck all away in a safe place. And I get it, I really do, because the risk was powerfully great. After all, you could lose everything. Having said that, his fear was actually the result of a fundamental misunderstanding on his part. The cause of his fear was a mistaken belief about the master as in God. He says, well, I knew that you are a hard man, harvesting where you have not sown and gathering where you have not scattered seed. So I was afraid, and I went out and hid your gold in the ground. But when we compare this parable to the other parables, it is nothing like the God that we know, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love and mercy. Likewise, if we have a fundamental misunderstanding of God, we will be fearful. We will live in fear. Will you join me in prayer? Oh, gracious God, help us to become masters of ourselves so that we might become the servants of others. Take our minds and think with them. Take our lips and speak through them. Take our hands and work with them. And take our hearts and set them on fire with your Spirit. Amen. If we have a fundamental misunderstanding of God, we will be fearful. We will live in fear. Now, the good news is if we have just an inkling, even just an inkling of an understanding of the nature of God, we can lean into life in all its fullness. Now, the human inclination is to let old tapes run in our heads. And so I want to begin by looking at what the text actually reveals and says about God. Jesus describes that would be from the peanut gallery, my dog Daisy, apologize. Jesus begins the parable, and he describes the master, he describes God as one who gives three servants all that he has, all. To the first servant, he gives 5 bags of gold. It also can be translated as 5 talents. 5 talents of gold. And to the second, he gives 2. To the third servant, he gives only 1 talent. Okay, that's my word, only 1 talent. But, think about it, actually. 1 talent was worth 6,000 denarii, and 1 denarii was worth the equivalent of a day's wage. So, in other words, the master gives the first servant 82 years of wages. Bam! I mean, that's crazy. The third servant, the poor, quote unquote, poor third servant, got only 1 talent? Well, he got 16 years of wages, thank you very much. And so I invite you to calculate in your head what that would mean given your annual income. A year's wages. Bam, get it. And I don't know about you, but this would be a significant chunk of change. This is mind-blowing. This parable invites us to understand that God doesn't just give to us abundantly, God gives over the top. So, how then are we to live in light of this extravagantly generous and abundant, over the top God? The owner, the master, gives all that he has to his servants. Now, think about that. He gives all that he has. Now, that's power. The master gives all that he has. That's access. That's the power of the owner. That's access to God. The Apostle Paul explains the power of God in terms of how God's Spirit finds expression in our lives. The fruit of the Spirit, the fruit of the power of God is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. God gives us access to the power of love and joy and peace and patience and kindness and goodness and faithfulness and gentleness and self-control. The question is, are we tapping into that access? Are we tapping into that power?
Okay, we open up.
Misunderstanding the nature of God leads to a misunderstanding of our own nature. In verse 25, because the third servant believes God is mean, he's hard, he's unfair, he says, well, I'm afraid. I was afraid. Afraid of what? Afraid of not measuring up to the task, of not being smart enough or capable enough. Seems to me, if your understanding of God is that God is unfair, then you're going to end up seeing yourself as a victim. Misunderstanding the nature of God leads to a misunderstanding of my own nature. And the converse is true also. If I believe at some core fundamental level that I'm just not okay, what am I saying? What am I saying about the God who created me? What God has so generously given us is not meant to be tucked away. It's meant to be spent in the world and in one another, and perhaps maybe just given away, because otherwise it is just wasted. Now, this parable does not end well, but you know what? I think this parable is still a parable about grace. Because what gives us access to that the power of love and joy and peace and patience and kindness and goodness and faithfulness and gentleness and self-control. What gives us access to that is the gratuitous love of God. It's the grace of God. And when grace received is buried, when it's buried and it's not shared, it simply dies, doesn't it? Grace needs to be shared in tangible ways, like in love and joy and peace and kindness. And sometimes that's easy, and sometimes it's grueling work. And when it's hard and when it's difficult, it's probably because there's been brokenness. It implies that something has been broken. And it probably means that wounds run deep. Accessing that power and expressing and sharing that power in tangible ways can be difficult. Especially, it seems to me now, in the days we're in, when there are those who differ from us in terms of their politics or their stances. It can be especially difficult when it's with people that we love. And what happens when the two are together, when it's people we love and they have different positions and stances? That can be especially hard. If I'm honest with myself, there's a part of me that is tempted to just turn my back, to bury in the ground these precious gifts of God, to withhold kindness and patience, to bury any feelings of love and steadfastness I might have. But you know what? If we don't share those gifts, well, this parable's for us right now, for right here and for right now. And we need to do something about that. We need to access those gifts, those talents. Otherwise, they will be wasted and nothing will change and something will die. And yes, I do not know what it looks like. I don't know what it looks like to lean into those talents and share those talents. But it does mean, I know it means that I need to take out my metaphorical shovel and dig them up. And I know it's time. This is the time to give thanks for everything that God has entrusted to me, entrusted to us. And that it is time to turn toward and not turn away, because it's long past time. Or the fate of the third one in Jesus' telling will be mine. It will be ours. And certainly there is already enough darkness, isn't there? There's enough weeping and gnashing of teeth. And I think Jesus knew that when he told this story. I think he knew that we would likely hear this story from the experience of the third one. It's long past time, yes, but it's not too late. And that, it seems to me, is the grace given and the grace received in Jesus' parable today. It's not too late. Thanks be to God. Amen.